It's really a pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today, who is really one of the leading Latin American historians in the United States and has been for a long time. Let me simply say that Herbert Klein, who is now professor of emeritus from Columbia University and is now on the staff at Stanford University, is the author of over 30 books and over 176 articles in professional journals. And what's impressive about his career is not the quantity of publications that he's done, but the variety of fields in which his work has become fundamental. If you are interested in contemporary Bolivia, if you're interested in the history of the slave trade, if you're interested in the comparative history of slavery, if you're interested in American demography, you always have to turn to Herbert Klein. And he's been working recently on the contemporary situation, social, political, and economic of Brazil. And his talk today is, as you can see, recent changes in Brazilian society, in which he talks about the rise of the national middle class. So please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker, Herbert Klein.
Thank you, Stuart. And let me start off by explaining my exotic title. Belindia was a term invented by Edmond Basha, famous Brazilian economist, to describe what was Brazil up until this decade. A country rather significantly divided between the North and the South, inverse of the United States and of Europe, where the South is usually the poor zone and the North is the rich. Here, the rich zone was in the South and the poor zone in the North. The poor zone was the Northeast and had a level of indice of health and well-being on the level of India at the time in the 1980s when this term was used, whereas the Southeast had a level equal to Belgium. So you had a bitterly divided, significantly divided society which had a tremendous impact on migration, on wealth, and on politics. And this has changed rather dramatically over a long period of time, but more especially in the last 2 decades, which has seen an acceleration of the rise of the new middle class, national middle class, with the same levels of education and health, whether they're in the Northeast, or the Center-West, or in the South. Okay, this is what the talk is all about, and I'm going to show you, this is the Human Development Index, which is used by the United Nations all the time. It's a combination index of health, education, wealth, and so on. And it shows you what Brazil looked like in 1970. It was beginning to change rather rapidly in 1991. 2005 changed even more dramatically. There are no recent numbers to give you, but the difference between the North and the Northeast and the South, Southeast, and the Center-West is dramatically different now. It's pretty much close to being a national society in which the indices of health, for example, are the same everywhere. Okay, Brazil until really well into the 20th century was a poor, backward country. It had a very high mortality rate. This is your crude death rate. It really doesn't start dropping until the 30s and 40s. The fertility rate, the crude birth rate, was quite high and unchanging up until about 65. Thanks to the pill, this will all change rather dramatically, and changes in the social and political organization. It was a classic, this is a age pyramid, this is the classic pyramid existence of an age pyramid, which shows you that with very high fertility, that is your base is quite large and your top is quite small as you age up. And this is a classic poor country kind of age pyramid. It was also primarily a rural society. Up until 1970, it was predominantly rural. And in fact, it is only recently that the population, has begun to change quite dramatically, and you've had movement now not only has the rural population stabilized, but now has declined, and it represents 15% of the total population. Moved from half. So we're talking about really 40 years, 40 to 50 years of dramatic change. Along with that, the literacy rate. Up until 1960, Brazil was primarily illiterate population. This was, even by Latin American standards, extremely backward. There's a whole history of education and why this was the case. It was usually regionally based. Each state does its own financing of education. There were lots of states that didn't properly finance the educational system, and it was really quite dramatic. This has all changed. It's now 90% or 90. It's rising each decade, but essentially 90%. There's also a decline of regional difference and rapid national change. So this had a lot to do with out-migration. The Northeast was 47% of the population in 1872, and it declines to 28% in 2010. There's migration now, there's just constant migration out of the Northeast into the North and Center-West, and traditionally the big migration south into especially Rio Grande and Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. The infant mortality by region, this is really quite spectacular. Look at the change, all of them have been changing. They're all declining. By the way, 18 per 1,000 live births is still very high. In the United States today, it's about 6. In Europe, it's about 4 deaths per 1,000 live births, just to give you a comparative idea. But the decline has been impressive, largely through government health plans and so on. But look how dramatic was the decline in the Northeast compared to the other areas. All the others have been moving progressively downward. The Northeast is the one where this is most dramatically. Child mortality, the same. Still high in certain areas, still slowly coming down from the Northeast, but in fact, doing reasonably well compared to what it was, say, in 2000. Notice we're talking about 10 years in which the changes have occurred, quite dramatically. And of course, life expectancy for the country as a whole, and it varies very little by region now, only moderately. And it's been moving up to world standards of what it should be like. Again, look at the Northeast. The change from one census to another between 2001, let's look at the census, 2001 and 2011, the change in life expectancy in the Northeast was much more rapid than it was in the other areas. In other words, the difference between the regions is declining because the Northeast especially is rapidly changing, more rapidly than the others. And then the total fertility rate has come down quite dramatically from 7 and 8 in 1940 in the poorer regions, 6 overall, down now to just about replacement level, 2.1 children per women, 14 to 49. And the difference, again, what I'm trying to stress here is that the differences between the regions have dramatically declined because the more backward regions have changed faster than the more advanced regions. In fact, it's declined so much that now the current projection is by the year 2039, the actual total population will start declining in Brazil if there's no major immigration. And this is what your age pyramids looks like. It's the famous jar. In other words, low fertility, more people surviving into middle and upper ages, and it begins to look like this. Not like a pyramid, but like a jar. And that's what this looks like in the last census of 2010. Now, what's very interesting is the regional wealth variations have not changed much. As the Southeast has grown, so has the Northeast. These are all related. This is a table which shows the relationship of all the other regions to the Southeast, which is the richest. The big change, of course, is the Central West, which moved from being Mato Grosso and so on. This is the soybean frontier, which moved from being one of the poorer regions, pretty much like the North, to being one of the richest regions in Brazil today. So there's even changes in the regional wealth, though the two, North and Northeast, still have not changed their space in relationship to the Southeast. Okay. Also, there's a major social and religious changes which have occurred nationally and which are affecting this new middle class. So, for example, here we have the percentage of the population 5 years and old who are literate. There's now no longer a difference between, in fact, traditionally, up until 1960, women were less literate than men. Nowadays, men are more illiterate than women are. And this is based on the PNAD, the National Survey of Households, that's done every year in Brazil. I'm not saying that the world has changed so dramatically that everything is wonderful and glorious. There are still differences. That is, the black and mulatto difference of levels of education for persons 25 years and older is slow, but there is a steady reduction from 2.3 years to 1.9 years difference between the two groups. So there are classes. The other interesting thing is the country is becoming more black. Since this is rather interesting, since there's no big in-migration of Africans or black Americans, what's happened is more and more people self-define themselves as mulattoes. That didn't exist before. In each census, it gets higher and higher. So it is now a minority-white population with a small contingent of Asians and Amerindians, rated less than 1%, and a very small self-defined black population. It is also becoming more and more Protestant, evangelical, and less Catholic. As of 1960, Catholics was 94% of the population. They're now down to 66%. In fact, the actual total volume number of Catholics has declined relative to the rest of the population. And of course, the other major change is women are in the labor force on a larger scale. Still relatively low, but still in the mid to lower 50% of the economically active population. Women of working age are in the workforce. There's also been a big change, not only in religion, but in marriage and marriage type. Consensual unions are now more the norm than they were in any time previously. People who only marry by religious activity is only 3% of the population. Even those who marry both religiously and civil is constantly declining. And with all the changes in the law, I don't want to get into I'm kind of tight on time, so I don't want to get into all the changes, but there's no such thing as illegitimacy anymore. This is universal through all Latin America. There's partible inheritance. Children inherit no matter what their civil status of their parents or whoever they had married, they still inherit. And so the necessity for marriage has declined. Consensual unions are more or less acknowledged and accepted in law and function that way. And the famous, you ask somebody if they're married, they all say they're married, and then you have to ask them, pasado por papel or no, and that is the definition of marriage. That is, they were actually married formally or not formally. And you would be surprised by class, ethnicity, and everything. There's no guarantee that anybody, even the elite, are married. But everybody says wife and husband, and that's it. Now, the other interesting thing is, we'll see, is that consensual unions are fairly stable, and you get a lot of, quote, illegitimate births, but illegitimate births to two-parent households. Heads of household by type, this hasn't changed much. You have women only who have children have gone from 15 to 70%. And I asked everybody in Brazil, and everybody says it's not a problem. It's a big problem in the United States. It's no problem in Brazil. And in fact, all of the social welfare programs only give money to women, never to men in the household. That's standard, whether they're legally married, unlegally married, whatever. So the dual-parent households are declining. The single-person households are slowly increasing. But as I said, this is not considered a major social problem, even with the rise of births out of wedlock. Okay, what's the cause for all this change? Massive growth of Brazilian agriculture, there's no question. There was a revolution in agriculture from the 1980s, and it's sudden, dramatic, and quite important. And now Brazil is a world class, equal to Canada, Australia, or the United States. Its production now influences world prices on a whole range of products. The soybeans is just one, orange juice, which if Florida gets a freeze, all of your oranges will come from Brazil. This kind of stuff that goes on. It's got iron ore, vast quantities of it, and even does some significant industrial exports with Embraer. Of course, rise of China, the commodities boom of China is now Brazil's primary trading partner. And equally important was the end of a long period of inflation, which goes from really from the late 70s on till the mid-1990s. That, with several cases of hyperinflation. If anybody was there in the old days, if you remember, 50% per month change in prices. You get paid at the beginning. I once got paid for a lecture, and I immediately had to invest it because I was going to a vacation at the end of the month, and if I didn't invest it, I wouldn't have the money that I had gotten to begin with. And I gave a quantitative methods course, and everybody, to historians, and they were all nervous, so I always asked everybody, did you lose any money last month? And they all said no. And I said, that's because you read the newspaper, right? And you decided where to put your money for the month. And you read the graphs, so now you passed the class. So they all laughed. Okay, equally important, and this goes way back to the military era, the conditional government income transfers. This, everybody has discovered, the Mexicans and the Brazilians are really the forerunners of this. Has a major impact on extreme poverty and to an extent on general poverty. So let's look at the end of inflation. This is Fernando Henrique Cardoso, 1994. He was the Minister of Finance. They finally get it right. They tried it under the Plan Cruzado. By the way, my co-author was the head of the Plan Cruzado, Francisco Vidal Luna. There was the Bresser Plan, the Verão Plan, Colas froze the bank assets. That was another attempt to kind of tighten up inflation. And it was done under Fernando Henrique and the Plan Real. And it was very complicated. You had to create a specialized money, slowly get off your regular real money. You had to deal with an exchange rate. It was quite a dramatic event. This goes on at the same time as they're denationalizing a lot of heavy industry. So it was really a very abrupt and massive change in Brazil. The bolsa escolar was Fernando Henrique. That Fundo Rural was done in 1971. It's the first one, actually. Having wiped out the peasant leagues, the military government decided to provide income to farm workers who'd never been part of the Social Security system. Half of a minimum wage. It wasn't much, but it was the beginning. And that was the first of a series of changes that developed. The conditional transfers are done by condition, meaning you require somebody to do something to get the money. So the first one is keep children in school. This was what the Bolsa Escolar was all about. Fernando Henrique was attempting to end child labor. And so you paid people to keep their kids in school. And everybody believed that the government really could do that. I was at a dissertation at Stanford in which she interviewed all the mothers in Bahia, and they were all convinced that if they didn't keep their kids in school, and she showed that bureaucracy was a total mess and they couldn't have figured out who was in or out of school anyhow. But everybody believed it, and it did have a major impact. Then you begin to, and this is the Bolsa Familiar, you begin to provide pensions for people who were not on the Social Security system. And that was more than half the population. So people who were over 65, first rural area, then urban area, and this has a major impact on breaking the correlation between age and poverty. For the first time in Brazil, that is broken, and it largely has to do with this. It absorbs about 3% of the GDP. It's fairly important and big, but it's a kind of thing that's had a major impact on the society. And then finally, this was helped by international grants, payment for maternal health visits. The idea here is to reduce infant mortality, to get women to all 3 trimesters to participate in clinics and in follow-ups and so on, and you pay them for going to visiting the doctors, and that does have an impact. Okay. Also, because of the change in the economy, once the booms and busts, but now it's steady. There's a secular trend up, and the average income GDP per capita is now almost $12,000. That's a significant rise in the last 30 years. Okay. The other significant change is the economically active population has gone from about 20 million to 25 million. The number of workers without cards, working cards, that is, a working card gives you pay Social Security, you're in the pension plan, unemployment plan, and everything else, now has dropped to only 15% of the economically active population. That's a real change. The informal economy, which is a major problem in most countries in Latin America, has declined quite significantly in Brazil. Okay, there's also growth of an internal market. This is a big boom. In other words, you now have a new market that's become spectacular in Brazil. And that really is the guts of my talk now. You have a new housing institute created in 1997, which guarantees home loans and changes the banking and civil codes. And this now allows banks to loan for 30 years. And prior to that, nobody bought an apartment on loans. You bought an apartment in construction and you paid monthly until the apartment was finished. And all you got was the blank walls, and you have to finish the apartment when it's done. And so you paid for an entire apartment before you even got into it. In this case now, you suddenly begin to have the ability to have car loans and housing loans. And you have new wealth being generated, so consumption pays off. A boom in public and private credit, long-term financing for white goods, cars, and housing. Now 55% of GDP, highest in Latin America in terms of credit. This just gives you how the boom occurred really very quickly from 2001 to 2015. The other very interesting thing is some 41% of the adults at the base of the economic pyramid, the poorest, the bottom 40% have bank accounts. This is a major difference from Latin America, 25% on average. And Brazil leads in the percentage of adults with a credit card, compared to all the other countries in Latin America. So there's not only been a change in income in general, but the income of the lower classes has grown faster than the income of the upper classes, in contrast to what's going on in the United States today. And so the Gini has gone down. There's huge debates about the Gini. The government has it in the 40s. This, I think, is more reasonable, and there are kind of debates about how you calculate non-salaried income, which is a major issue in Brazil. But essentially what you have here is a big decline in the Gini. And this has all had an impact on poverty, and we'll talk about the classes in a minute. But essentially, and most of it, it starts with the Plan Real, kind of settles down, and then really drops under Lula. And this is why you get the PT in the government for all of these years. It is an acknowledgement of this enormous change. And the percentage of indigent has gone down quite considerably from 17% to 5%. By the way, I did this just for fun. This was the evolution from 1980 to 2010 of the percentage of extremely poor houses, couldn't even provide basic food, diet that is a minimum diet for health, in the states with the most extreme poverty. That is Piauí, Maranhão, Ceará, and Paraíba. And look at the declines, systematic declines in all of them. So it's everywhere this has occurred. Okay, what is the definition of the middle class? This is an ongoing, never-ending debate in Brazil. The Brazilians define it as a consumption class. Not by status, not by whether you command workers, not by what your occupation is, not by the level of your education, it's by your income and what you can consume. So this is your class C. nowadays, they even combine Class A and B, D and E are the poverty ones. So it's the actual, on the actual exchange rate, this gives you between, I screwed up a little, $10,000 to $26,000 a year. By the way, I'm counting 13 months because you always get an extra month for Christmas, as everybody knows. But the actual, there's a purchasing power parity rate, it's about between $18,000 and $45,000 a year, meaning what they can purchase in Brazil compared to what could be purchased in the United States, given the amount of money, and that's what the IPEA data estimates the rate is. Okay, who is it? Well, the C class goes in just from 2003 to 2014 from 38% to 60%. It is now the largest class in Brazil. It wasn't that way before. D and E, which they now combine, has gone down to only a quarter of the population, from over half to a quarter. Very short period of time. And this is a famous, El País had a famous thing, it's been reproduced in many. If the Brazilian middle class was a country, and in terms of population, it'd be 12th in the world. In terms of its consumption, it would be 18th in the world, ahead of the Netherlands and Switzerland. In Brazil, it's now more than 54% of Brazil, and accounts for 58% of credit. It is really a major class, and there's been a tremendous development of shopping centers and everything else. There's famous quotes. Why can't the poor have shopping centers with moving escaladas? You know, they go up and down and all this kind of stuff. So you have modern shopping centers in essentially 4 districts. Now, these are the cartoons. This is the whole question. It's defined by consumption and not by socioeconomic status. So I just threw in 2. This one says, smile, woman, 2 more reais, and we will be out of this damn extreme poverty. And the other one says, I'm in the middle class, and I'm a middle class as well. So this is a question that economists, sociologists still discuss. In terms of Brazil, the question is consumption, and that's how they define it. Well, I have a few more minutes, so I'll keep on going. The fall of Brazil, why has the PT really taken a big hit? Brazil was supposedly be taking off, this new middle class has risen, and suddenly everything falls apart. In 2008, the government, supposedly responding to the world crisis, which did not particularly affect Brazil, starts closing the economy and going back to kind of traditional pre-1990 programs, especially controlling prices, which has a tremendous negative impact on Petrobras, on the ethanol industry, and so forth. And these policies aren't reversed until this year. In the election of 2014, of course, Dilma had a second term of Lula, and Dilma replaced him. But the collapse of the PT government, corruption and efficiency, and you have all of the scandals, which are millionarian scandals. In other words, the corruption levels are, bribes are $2 or $3 million each. Nothing small. When we get a senator for $10,000 in the United States, in Brasilia, that doesn't buy anything. High cost of public works that are never finished, decline of public secondary education, decline of SUS, the national health system, is very important here. You have the growth of the world's largest private university system, and this has a big impact on the new middle class, both unregulated and of poor quality, and regulated high-quality public universities are for the rich, who went to private schools. This is the classic blockage in Brazil. And the decline of the public health system. These are just cartoons, I won't get into you with all. Okay, the collapse of the PT government. Return of inflation, now up to 10%, economic stagnation, negative primary budget for the first time in 15 years, complete loss of congressional control, and demands for impeachment. And here's the question. This was the response, not only of the upper class, but of the new middle class. They've arrived, and what do they want? They want good government services. They want good public transport. which is a mess. The infrastructural question in Brazil is a major question. They want good public health, which they had in the 90s and has been declining ever since because of the corruption and the lack of funds. The World Cup was a major disaster in the sense of each stadium cost 10 times what it cost anywhere else in the world. And so this was the response to the shock of everybody. Brazil is a fanatic football-playing society, and to have them suddenly demand an end to the World Cup and the need for hospitals and education. And this was the Anti-World Cup Marches of 2013, and this is the popularity of Dilma. These are various surveys, Datafolha and Ibape. And essentially, she's now declined to 7% support in the country. And as everybody points out, that's worse than Collor when he was impeached. There's been a total decline in support for the PT. The PT is losing people left and right. Marta Suplicy, who has a good chance of being the next mayor of Sao Paulo, was left the PT, and she was a big leader in the PT. So the party is essentially collapsed. Lula himself, his son, is now being accused of corruption. So the point is there is a recession, a decline in consumption, a slowing of the movement of people into the middle class. In fact, the latest estimates is 3 million Brazilians have moved back into classes D and E and have collapsed. It's still a major class, it's not disappearing. And so there's a general sense of unease and based on all of this new middle class which has arisen and demands a basic response from a government that has been incapable of responding. Okay, thank you.
Questions? I would like to try speaking English with some English. There's no rules about something. My friends from the university, my girlfriend, they talk about namorados. It's a mix between namorado, boyfriend, and marido. They live together, right, and they don't consider any category that you speak about. I don't know. And they use the expression produção dependente. They're looking for a guy to have a date, independent of the guy wants or not. I don't know if they are kidding or serious or they're talking. And about corruption, I did a course in the Federal School of Police. I don't know exactly how to say. Federal Academy of Police. Yeah, it's a school just about police. Around 10 years ago, the federal police in Brazil do greves. I don't know how can I say greves.
Strike.
Right, yes. In my city, it's a small city in Nordeste, Natal, we couldn't see outdoors about the, how can I say, federal police completely like sucata, destroyed. They just could not work. When a delegado make a, how can I say, investigação, a research about crimes, the federal government transfer. It's like the things that happen in the States today. The police that need to investigate the government, the mayor, they cannot work because there is no tools, there is no way to work. So the corruption, how can I say, in the States, in the city, is much more today, how can I say, easy to happen than in federal. And I stayed there, did a course during 3 months, and the Federal Academy of Police just don't stop studying.
Okay.
Specialized everything. I'm finished.
So what's the question?
No question. I had one more observation. I'm sorry. I stay in the market, in the streets, we call feira. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I worked there. After 5 years, I stayed at the university. I still go to the feiras, in the streets. A lot of children asking for coins, looking for small works for save money. Today, if you stay in my city in the feiras, I stay there. Before I come here, I cannot see children. it's a difference. I am not, how can I say, I'm just making commitments because I'm not able for asking questions or disagree with something that if I understood completely, I'm sure that I will disagree about the final of the lecture. Is it? Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes?
You said that one thing discussed definition is the definition of the class C,
Right.
right consumption.
Right.
How would you think that class C would be if we adopted the definition of social economic status?
Much less. Obviously much less. And there are certain economists that have looked at this and would argue if you look at wages and position in the occupation, skill level, this kind of thing, then you would reduce it. But the Brazilians define it as who can consume automobiles, apartments, white goods, refrigerators, TV, everybody has a TV. And Haji, 98% of Brazilians have a color TV now.
Yes.
So 98%.
And iPhone also.
Yeah. Everybody, the favelas are filled with iPhones. No problem about that. Yeah.
I just, I wanted to point out also that defining it by consumption is a problem, and it's widely discussed in Brazil. But there's also the fact that most basic services are provided by the government.
Yeah.
And that impacts, like what you were just talking about. Everybody has a car and television and a refrigerator, but they don't pay for health.
Right.
They don't pay for education.
Right.
And I mean, I think being in the United States and studying in the United States, it seems from a different perspective. You're struck by what a huge difference this makes, especially for people who live in lower classes and who have a smaller income. When you don't have to pay for education, when you don't have to pay for health.
And there are tickets for those who are working to have lunch. There's also subsidy for all the low wages are subsidized by a ton of different programs for public transport to get to and from work, tickets to have lunch for free, all this kind of stuff. No, we're the society that's crazy, not Brazil.
No, but I feel like presenting this in the United States, it kind of distorts even further your idea of what middle class means. These people, if you were to explain to an American how they live, they are not middle class. This is not anyone's idea of what middle class is. If you make $1,000 a month in Brazil, well, in today's ratings, which are terrible, and you have 2 children, most people can have even more children than that, you are not middle class at all. You live like a poor person.
Well, you do and you don't. Let's go through a few things. One, the middle class in the United States, if you look very carefully, does not travel overseas, does not have a passport, goes to Disneyland. Wait, but I'm just telling you, the middle class in America is not like they don't go to Yale. Let's get clear, unless they're geniuses and they get special help. 30% of Americans have passports, that's all, just to give you some idea, and yet the middle class is bigger than that. So the middle class does, even in the United States, gets a little fuzzy as you get down towards the working class. And the working class gets fuzzy in Brazil as you move up into the middle class. So that's one thing. The other thing is most societies do provide education and health for their population. So all of Europe does that, Australia, New Zealand, everybody else. We're the ones who are least doing that. Now the big complaint, for example, the middle class complained bitterly to the day that they weren't getting support for education because the rich were going to the universities free of charge, the public universities, and they had to pay. So now there are fellowships to go to the private universities, and capitalist bandidos have just simply taken over the universities and made a fortune out of it. And there's no control over the quality of education, whether they're supposed to have a library, how many professors have a PhD, on and on you go. And so it's become...
As of 2013,
Right.
half of the public universities colleges are reserved for people who are socioeconomic.
Not all universities, some.
Well, federal universities.
Federal.
Right, so you're
But
talking
USP
about
doesn't,
top
and
public
Campinas doesn't,
Well,
and even
those are
then...
the best universities in the country, but
Right.
it's because São Paulo follow is like.
Fine, I'm just giving you a little bit of a comparison sense. So the real question here is, all right, you want to do it the private university, then the government should control. But they're against meritocracy. The PayPay officially is against meritocracy and everything else like that. So these are just mills, like we have in the one or two in the United States are like that. We've closed them down. The Brazilian doesn't. And so people graduate with titles and degrees that are useless. You can't do law if you've gone to a private law school. That's it. Yeah.
I don't know, not exactly the question, but can you talk, the number that shocked me was, what, Brazil's about 200 million people?
Yeah.
You said economically active is only 25 million people?
No. No. Oh, 25. Well, no, it's, let me have the population in the major cities. That was urban.
Okay.
Okay. Question?
The definition of middle class is like fuzzy, but I think I would like to ask you more about inequality and inequality reduction, because and there are all these problems with Gini, but if you try to measure it like through any other method that's not Gini, there are not many evidence that inequality has actually been reduced. Because there is a movement that's similar to the ones that happened in the United States. The 1% of the population that are the richest, they have also gotten much more rich.
Oh, no question. The question is their rate of increase of income has been less than the rate of increase in the lower classes. Not that the lower classes are now extraordinarily wealthy, it's just that the rate of increase has been quite rapid. And 60, which used to be 62, 63, is extraordinarily unequal. They're Brazil and 2 African countries were the worst in the world in terms of income inequality. And now they've moved down towards the United States, which is in the 40s, and they're even the upper 40s or the lower 50s, depending on what you use and how you use it. And even the recalculations I've seen only move it up into the middle to the upper 50s, which still is better than it used to be. So it's not that the rich have been taxed to death, or that they don't exist, or that inequality isn't there. It's there. It's just that the bottom there's been an enormous change at the bottom, and that's where the wealth is going. Yeah.
Also on that note, especially concerning the bottom of the pyramid, a lot of people went out of hunger in Brazil.
Right.
And that's something worth telling. We, for the first time, are out of the hunger map, and that's something huge. So, my question actually is, because you do understand that a lot of criticism and a lot of take towards the government comes from, is it the right way, again, people out of poverty only by means of consumerism and by means of consumption, but is there any other way? Because in my eye first, I think you stop starving, then you educate yourself. Would there be any way, would there be any other possibility out of this? Would there be any way around this way that's been the way for the last couple of years in Brazil?
It's a capitalist society. It's a capitalist society. There is no other way. I mean, there is a way, but you'd have to change the political and economic system. And that way you would do a completely different way of doing it. But this is a capitalist system which has a large social welfare state. And that combination of capitalism and welfare state, so as long as you have growth of the economy along with major redistributional programs, this is the way you get it. And you know the famous campaign against hunger showed that there was no hunger in Brazil. That is, the birth weights of children is about, low birth weights, one of the classic indicators, is about the same in Brazil as it is in the United States and in Europe. And so these indices have shown that the consumption of food, at least now, is well distributed in the entire country. And you have a modern agricultural system which really distributes well. You have a very good, you don't have mom and pop shops in Brazil. You have supermercados all over the place. And these distribute goods fast and furiously and well connected to the agro-business cycle. So that's not a major problem. No, you can do it, but you have to go the Chinese way or the Russian way. And you had there was a question here, yeah.
Hi, so you talked about consumerism, but I want to hear a little bit more on your take on the consequence of consumerism. It's one of the consequences is the personal debt.
Yeah.
Because a lot of critics are been raising that issue for some time in Brazil. And I wonder, for the question first is that based on your knowledge, is how serious it is compared to other capitalist society like the United States, to the percentage of personal debt. And I wonder how much of that has also influenced the downgrading, if you will, of the class. People moving from C to D because they are unable to pay their extraordinarily high interest rate of credit for university, which is crazy.
No question. The banks did very well. The banks are always doing very well. Well, there's a whole range of things about this, but there is no question that everybody has said that Brazil is unusual in the sense of a rapid development of a private credit market, and that this is really much bigger than it had been before. Has it reached European and American standards? Not quite. It's still below that in terms of the total. But as soon as you start having a massive dismissal of workers, the automobile industry has dismissed 200,000 or 300,000 workers already. You're beginning to have an impact, and people will be unable to pay. And you did have credit because the banks got good laws which allowed them to repossess property. So in one sense, they loan because now it's possible to repossess, and they will repossess. So you're going to have a very serious problem developing. So far, politically, it hasn't manifested itself as a major problem, but it will if it continues the way it is. Yeah.
Yes, another question about development. Can you talk about the impact of affirmative action policies and increasing access to higher education? I know it's been a contentious issue recently.
Well, the real issue is the public universities, not the
Right.
private universities. Will take anybody as long as they pay whatever color, condition, and servitude or freedom that exists. But the public universities, well, they've done it in Brazilian terms. They've done it reasonably well in the sense the criteria are now both economic and color. So you have to have gone to a public schools, your parents have to have gone to a public schools, and you have to show a photo in some of these places that you're really black and not mulatto and not Brazilian and not whatever. It becomes a very complicated issue. But it's clear that this is not going to resolve the issue. The issue has to be the private universities, which are now absorbing. They were absorbing 20 or 30% of the university students. I think the rate is now about 60% of the university students are private universities. So what the government really has to do is put, really the Ministry of Education has to start putting in standards and start forcing these private universities to produce adequate classes, adequate education for the middle class. That's really got to go. The major universities will have their tokens, but the real guts of the thing has to be the private university system because it now exists. There's no option. So, yeah.
Are there loans for education? Are there loans? Like
Yes, there are. No, it's fellowships. They get straight fellowships to go to school. So, of course, the guy sets up a university and accepts everybody and graduates from a primary school, from public school, and walks away with the money. Yeah.
Only is sort of
Right.
it works like that. It
Also
helps a little.
A little.
Yeah.
It's not right. But the real question is the quality of the education that these people get. And they don't compete in the labor market with it. And that's the issue. And this is the area, 20 years ago it was not an issue, but now the private university system is an issue, and you have to deal with it. Yeah.
For someone like myself who's been working with results since the 1960s, the most noticeable thing that you see here, first of all, is the change from the rural to an urban society. It's just, amazing, that change that has taken place. The second thing is, in the 1960s, the great worry was that 2/3 of the population were under 20 years of over 20 years of age. And there was all this concern about that population explosion that was supposed to be coming to Brazil by the beginning of the 21st century, which has disappeared.
Yeah, completely. The UN has a famous estimate of what the population would be like in 2000, and the Brazilians came about 40 million under, or 50 million under.
The third thing is the rise of the center-west in terms of the thing, and really the creation of the north, the new northeast.
Right.
But so how is it in the center-west? What's happening? What is
Modern agriculture. Modern agriculture, all over.
And is that reflected through the social level?
Sure. It's all mechanism. Brazil now can produce soybeans cheaper than the United States, more efficient. Getting into market is a little more expensive. You have real problems with infrastructure, moving goods to the ports and from the ports out. And there's been constant conflict over this. Santos is a mess. Many of the other ports are a mess. They're trying to build private ports. This is a big issue. But everywhere, you go into the backwoods of Bahia and you get modern agriculture all over the place. And so this has been the change. Rural Brazil is like Australia now, or the United States, or Canada, everywhere. I mean, except in the more, where the land is useless. But even there are various parts of lands that were unfarmed for years. The scientific institutes that the Brazilians have been pouring in money and developing crops that were working in there. Yeah. Wait, the question over here first.
You focus on the sociological changes, but I wonder if what do you say about we have a problem-related phenomenon in our political system also, the rise of new right-wing or neo-conservative movements, and they are new because they're different from the old anti-democratic right-wing, but they're conservatives or right-wing because they are targeting the very policies you mentioned in your presentation, such as cash transfer, universal system of pension, there are privatization in Brazil. So do you think that you can understand this phenomenon maybe as a reaction against the inclusion of the poor in our society, or is it a different thing?
I think it's a different thing. First of all, you have the evangelical, and that's the evangelical Christians are now a big political power, and they're very conservative on a whole range of family issues and things like that. So that's a new conservative class that didn't exist before. But the debates in the newspapers and the debates you get, I go to Sao Paulo all the time, so maybe I'm biased and you get a viewpoint, but the debates are more complex than that. And so the question of income transfers, how long do you keep it going, and how much do you create a dependency group that can't function independently? So that's an issue that's beginning to be discussed. Politically, I don't think there's a reaction against inclusion. I don't get that sense among the Brazilian elite, at least the Paulista elite. I know now you really do talk about regional elites, and the Northeastern elite probably is a little nervous. On the other hand, the political system seems to be very fragmented, and I just don't see the kind of, patria, familia, that kind of stuff doesn't exist anymore. But you do get serious questions from the evangelical right. That's the only group I see as representing a coherent policy, and their base is equally much in the middle class as anybody else in the new middle class. So they're not going to alienate the new middle class on education, health, and distribution of resources. And the elite, it's relatively costless for the elite. I mean, they're not being taxed terrifically, so that they can. I don't get the sense that anybody's particularly concerned about it. I don't see it in political parties. Yeah.
Do you think it would be a good thing for Brazil to try to decentralize in a sense and kind of like get more industrial place out of Sao Paulo, the center you're talking about, in Belo Horizonte?
No, they have. I mean, Minas is the big auto center, and they moved the petrochemical industry to the northeast. So they've been doing that for years, and that's been a government policy that goes way back to the military and before. Everybody's been moving.
Social Fertility,
What?
that was part of the plan.
Yeah.
They used to have tax benefits for industries that would move, create factories in the north.
The tax system, the way that all the taxes.
And you have to remember also, this is a federalist system. This is a federalist system. Education is under the states. And so it's very much a diffused federalist program. But there's been, industry is fairly dispersed. Yeah.
How do you see the impact of social movements such as MST in this post-social change?
That's good. Well, MST has been fairly tied to the PT. And so a lot of people think it's a kind of political arm of the PT and the movements for it. But when you have 15% of the population that's rural, land reform doesn't become an issue anymore. As an urban property is an issue, but rural areas are not. When the movement for taking over the land got going in Sao Paulo, everybody started investing in land to make sure that the land is still being produced and things like that. But the real problem about that is the northeast. Everybody agrees that the maximum size of fazenda should be X number of hectares. And in the north, you have these enormous ones that are inefficient, that are ecologically unsound, and you don't need cattle up there at all. You can do it much more efficiently in much smaller units, and the north and the whole Amazonian region should be left alone. So that's a big issue. But the Movimento Sem Terra it sometimes is used, it doesn't have much of an impact anymore, but it did have had a major impact on that. Yeah.
You say a few words about the geopolitical situation in Brazil with its neighbors, especially with the United States, with the relations on it, and how that has evolved maybe over the last couple of decades.
But look, it's China that's most important now. I mean, that's really become, without question. I mean, I was in very conservative government of Chile when they got the first free trade pact with China, and they were celebrating today, so nobody cares about the United States very much, unless it can influence politics. And Dilma's had good and bad relations, but they more identify with the BRICS, and the relations with their neighbors are relatively quiescent at the moment. There's no major conflicts. I used to get talks in Brazil about Bolivia, and I would start by saying, Bolivia is a neighbor where they don't speak Portuguese. And they would all laugh and say, we know, I'm pretty sure they did. So it's really, Latin America is not their concern, and Mercosur is a waste of time as far as Brazil is concerned. They're not doing that well out of it. The Argentines are forever changing rules. And at times it's a very good market for Brazil, and at other times a very bad market. And so the real concern is the EU and China.
And it seems to me that, just a quick follow-up, that when I was there recently, Brazil is very environmentally sensitive, maybe the most environmentally sensitive place in the world. That I've been very conscious about recycling and worried about Amazon, especially what the. Sorry, what's that?
Sorry, weird week to say that it's a terrible environmental accident.
Yeah, she's right. And even though they talk a good talk,
Right,
they
there's
say it's been
concern,
the
that's
worst.
right. I don't
The
know
worst
if they're
one in
When
terms
it
of,
came down to it, they weren't all that concerned.
right.
Well, among the people, I'm go
Right.
to Sao Paulo myself frequently, and you see it, at least that the perception. One of the perceptions is look, we have to protect Amazon, and from big American interests that seem to me to be one of the concerns, right? So there's a little bit of anti-Americanism that I'm detecting there. Maybe if you can talk about the social trends there, do you see anything of that sort? In the country?
Particularly anti-American, no. The government has supported Venezuela very strongly, it's supported Cuba very strongly. Things have changed now, so there's no problem on the Cuban question. And so the question then remains that they've supported the Venezuelans. They've tried to make sure that the conflict with Colombia doesn't become too dramatic. They're neutral on the Chile, Peru, Bolivia, seacoast question. In essence, they run a very good foreign policy generally to keep a low profile. And there's debates within the elite about being more pro-American or not. That, there's no question that is a big issue under Dilma, because Dilma, you know, after all, she did capture an ambassador at one point. Was with the group that tried to seize an ambassador and things like that. She was a rebel against the U.S. intervention, so there's no question there's some kind of conflict there. But you know, if you ask me what's going on in Latin America, the U.S. is very concerned with the Middle East and the Far East, and it's left Latin America alone. Latin America, in the meantime, has become very much tied into China, and what goes on in China becomes very important. And the economy of Brazil is very sensitive to consumption of goods in the Chinese market.
I just want to mention that there is this movement in São Paulo, which is the anti-ST, which stands for which is literally a movement of homeless workers, so to speak. I don't mean to pry or anything, but you say that you do not sense some sort of reactionary thinking about inclusion or anti-social inclusion in Brazil, especially in São Paulo. Whom are you talking to in the city?
Mostly people in banking and industry. And I would say that they all talk the good talk, but they do the good thing. It's another story, but they all talk the good talk. Inequality is a major issue. Nobody protests. There's been really no protest about the income transfer programs. Everybody studies them, everybody looks at them, everybody analyzes them, and the only question that remains is how long do you keep this up? And this is a question that's universal in these kinds of issues. When does the infant mortality rate get down to a certain point and the distribution of clinics, prenatal clinics, is so good in the entire country that you no longer have to pay for a program to get women to go to prenatal care? These are the issues. I don't really see, I mean, they're clearly it's right and left in Brazil, but of course by American standards, they're all to the left. So it's a little difficult to see the complex, but the question is an interesting one, and I've not seen any question about inclusion, because everybody makes money on consumption. And they go on and on about the new class needs this, and we have to do this for the new class, and so on. So it's an inclusion, not exclusion.
It's a contradiction, but happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. It happens. People save a lot of money with a kind of politics, but at the same time, they talk against the same politics. It happens. I can see. And about inclusion, people don't go to the street, but in groups like this one, they show the hate about the social inclusion. I can see, I testify in my day by day. They don't go to the street, but
So it's true that everything's towards the left. Like you take the political spectrum, like in the US, and you move it all towards the left, and that's what you have in Brazil. But we didn't have anything like the Tea Party. And now we have some manifestations of the Tea Party in Brazil. So there is a new party that wants to be libertarian, which is something we've never seen before.
Right.
And people who are actually enraged about this. They absolutely hate the distribution.
Yeah, but this is, how big is that party? How big is that party? I mean, it doesn't get into the newspapers, it doesn't get discussed, nobody's getting into it. It's not like, no, wait a minute. It's not like Le Pen, which is a real movement in France and really has a major impact. This is a party that
They organize conferences, it is in the papers, and they organize conferences, and they have people in big magazines in Brazil that speak for them. They are enraged by this. And all these people that are the libertarian people who write in Veja, they're all.
It's
crazy. When they speak to a part of the population. So
Look,
it's really,
every,
it
look,
sucks.
every society has a right, left, and center, no question about it. There's also people who would be in the traditional middle class who don't like, I didn't even show you I have a whole bunch of cartoons about middle class people sitting there having tea, and the servant comes in and they're saying, oh, you're now in the middle class, so what, you want to sit down next to us and eat with us and this kind of stuff? Sure, class, it's a capitalist society. Class did not disappear. The upper class is the upper class, the middle is the middle, and the bottom is the bottom. And yes, color is also a significant issue. All of these things are still there, but what is most important, I think, that I try to make in this lecture, is that there's been profound change, and really rapid change, and that change is not going to go away, and even if you have a long-term crisis in the economy, it's not going to have an impact in sense of returning to Belindia. Belindia doesn't exist anymore, and Brazil is a unified country, and therefore you're going to have a lot of hostility and a lot of conflict, and you always have it and you always will. But the country has changed profoundly. Everybody's literate, for God's sakes. I mean, you're getting up to being pretty much a literate society and an urban society, and then you have the issues of who lives where and how and what and everything that goes with it in the neighborhoods. And then the government becomes a key factor in leveling the playing field. And if the government is inefficient and can't do it, then you've got problems. And that's the political problem with Brazil. Not so much the libertarian movement or anything like that, it's that the government itself is inefficient and can't do it, and people demand it and want it. And this is what all the big manifestations were all about, and they were popular. They brought in all kinds of classes and everybody else, and it's really, this is the issue. So the issue for Brazil now is to get a government that relates to the society that has changed so profoundly.
Okay. One last question.
You talked about escalada, etc. Could you please maybe talk about the positive contributions of these operations to democracy and rule of law in Brazil? Because like other Latin American countries, unlike other Latin American countries, those kind of operations have never taken place.
No,
even though the corruption levels are equally high.
Yeah, no, the Brazilians, going back to the Polícia Federal, they've gotten very popular because of their investigations of Lava Jato and all that goes with it. And there's just been tremendous pride going back to the Mensalão convictions and then into the Metralão development. And what's happened is everybody's been shocked about how efficient the judicial system was. And people walk around and say, look, we're really a democracy. We're really a serious country. We're really, look, they're all getting in. And they put the biggest, construction company people, executives, the biggest, in jail for corruption. I mean, that's...
We didn't do that.
We didn't do that, right?
Isn't it 1-9?
No, various of them have got 10 years, 7 years.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, I mean, this is really unusual. This is not usual. And Brazilians are very proud of it. And I think it's an important point. And I think even, there was even a discussion about, in the right, left, and center, about the impeachment. Should you impeach Dilma? Is that the correct way for a democratic society to deal with the issue or not? And if it did, should the vice president, and then Cunha is a mess, and then what do you do with him? Should he, David, and Temer, was the question, would Temer be accused of illegally using funds during the election campaign and so forth? So people are very much concerned and very proud of the fact that the military is not even in this picture. It has nothing to do with what's going on. One military man made a statement last week and he was immediately dismissed and everybody thought that was good. He said this kind of government can't continue and boom, he was out of a job. So there's no question that there's a tremendous pride, and the efficiency of the judiciary is such that you can't quite go back to the old ways. In the way that, look, every government has corruption. The question is, 5% or 50%? If it's 5%, you can live with it. 50%, nothing works. And that's the Brazilian problem.
Thank you very much.